Good afternoon and welcome. On behalf of the Chamber, we hope you're joining us today feeling safe and healthy. My name is Bea Jimenez, and I'm the Director of Economic Opportunity at the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us today for Doing Business with Mass General Brigham, a Pacesetters event series launched in August 2020. We launched the Pacesetters Doing Business series to help bring transparency to corporate procurement practices and to provide real opportunity to Black and Brown businesses to get connected. We hope that today's program serves as a virtual networking opportunity and an introduction to our Pacesetters work in each of the companies meeting the mission of using procurement as an equity tool. By joining Pacesetters, companies will have the opportunity to be part of a diverse collective of business leaders committed to creating systemic opportunity and utilizing their purchasing power to create a more equitable Commonwealth. With Pacesetters, we truly are making the business case for inclusion. We invite all of you to join us on this journey. I want to share a few notes before we begin today's program. Thank you to the sponsors of our economic opportunity work, John Hancock and Eastern Bank. We are extremely appreciative of our continued partnership with these remarkable corporate citizens. I want to also flag that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared on our Chamber YouTube page shortly after the presentation. Finally, throughout the event, please make sure to submit your questions for the Mass General Brigham team using the Q&A feature next to the chat. Now, I'm pleased to introduce a few of today's speakers. We're joined by a great group from Mass General Brigham, including Peter Markell, who is currently the Executive Vice President of Administration and Finance, the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer at Mass General Brigham. Peter has been a leading executive at Mass General Brigham since 1999, and his responsibilities include financial oversight of $14 billion in operations, with assets of approximately $21 billion, and management within the areas of corporate finance, research management, information systems, real estate, treasury, and human resources. He is also the chair of the Boston College Board of Trustees and sits on several other boards, including at Eastern Bank and the McLean Hospital Board. Welcome, Peter. Thank you for taking time to join us today. Next, we are joined by Mark Faulkner. Mark is the Senior Director of Strategic Supply Chain Management and Sourcing for Mass General Brigham. Mark has responsibility for the corporate contracting system strategy, and this includes vendor management, capital and leasing, the Minority Business Enterprise Program, IT, pharmacy contracting, analytics, and much more. Under Mark's direction, Strategic Supply Chain Management at Mass General Brigham has a portfolio of over 3,500 contracts with an annual supply chain spend of $3.2 billion. Thank you for joining us, Mark. We will also hear from others in the Mass General Brigham Procurement and Supplier Diversity team, including Ingrid Beckles, a fierce advocate for supplier diversity and our Pacesetters co-chair for the program. As the manager of supplier diversity at Mass General Brigham, Ingrid Beckles has made significant enhancements to Mass General Brigham and their supplier diversity program. In 2011, she brought together a group of 12 colleagues across the organization to form Mass General Brigham's Supplier Diversity Advisory Council. Under her leadership, the Supplier Diversity Program continues to develop by increasing the number of engagements with minority-owned businesses. In today's program, she will share with our audience how their Mass General Brigham team manages all aspects of their supplier diversity work. Thank you, Ingrid, for all that you do and for working with our team to help make today's event a success. And with that, I'll turn it over to Peter and Mark to get the event started.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for us to be here with you today. Before I get started, I just want to thank my whole team who will be presenting after me. They really do this work, and I want to particularly acknowledge Ingrid, who has been with us from the start on our minority supply chain efforts. So I just wanted to spend a minute talking about why we do this and why we consider the Pacesetters program and all the efforts in this area really critical. As was just noted, we have 14 billion in operating expenses, of which 3.3 billion are supplies and other expenses. That's a lot of money, no matter how you cut, slice, or hack it. And the impact we can have on the community on how we choose to spend that money is significant. So when we thought about this, the real goal was to lift up all communities in the area we serve. So the way you can help the underserved and everyone else do better is to create jobs and create wealth. And the way to do that is to help these minority businesses grow and interact with corporations such as ours. So what are the challenges we face? They're really twofold. One is, how do we find minority supplier firms, and then how do we help them learn how to interact, do business with us, and get contracts? The second is internal to us. How do we work with our managers, the people who are purchasing services, to say, we want to give minority firms an equal and fair opportunity to do business with us. And that means you need to be open about who you network and who you contract with. So it's easy to talk about, it's difficult to execute. And we have been very focused on that execution and hope the Pacesetters program will continue to help create the bridges necessary between minority supplier firms and us. Very important to the success of our community. And if we are able to really show that we will work with you as a minority supplier to get business with us and sustain that business, then we can make a difference in the community. And again, we believe if we can create jobs and create wealth in all our communities, we in essence create a healthier community. And that's what we have been focused on. And over the years, we've had some successes, WestNet being one of them, but we would like to have more successes. So hopefully we can improve what we do. You can figure out how better to work with us, and we create great success for our community when we're done. So with that, let me turn it over to Mark Faulkner, who will talk about what it's been like to manage the supply chain during this pandemic. Mark?
Thank you, Peter. So some of the challenges we've been experiencing over the past year or so with the COVID has really been about manufacturing the PPE and where we can actually receive our product in consistent manner. We've had many challenges along the way in regards to the way we do business and our strategies to procure. We typically, as leverage a system with our size, as we discussed, we're able to actually put more eggs in one basket and command a good price and get a good product. And during this COVID period, that strategy has challenged us because those companies could not fulfill all of our needs. We could not identify exactly where the manufacturer of the product was throughout the world, either domestically or internationally. So we had to pivot in many ways to try and figure out how to get more opportunities for having more companies to provide us back the products that we need. And there's many, many things that challenge us by doing so. We had many organizations locally and locally and internationally that we could lean on. And many of those companies, they were minority business enterprise as well as women owned. And some of those things they're looking at is not just the product itself, as the services needed to support all that. So as part of this slide that you just see in front of me, I'm sorry, next slide, please. I'm sorry, Allison. Sorry about that. The slide I'm looking at right here is a lot of things were the supplies that we needed on PPE, but was also the staffing that needed for it. We had to put a lot of planning together to understand what to fulfill those needs were and what the usage was. A lot of work, we had to work with the administrators as well as the clinical leadership to identify those things. We had to come up with some predictive analytics to support it, but we didn't have the infrastructure or our technology in our fingertips to do that. So that had to be created with our analytics team to try and figure those things out as we move forward within the process. But many of those things was disruptive for us, and we did not know how long the surge is going to happen, or it was going to be multiple surges. As you know, that we're in a second one as we speak, and towards the tail end. But many of those things challenge us in our process. Next slide, Allison, please. So as part of that, what we did moving forward in the path forward, we actually looked at strategic partnerships and relationships with many companies. Peter alluded to the WestNet. They were able to help us with not only products, but services that we needed based on their expertise and knowledge. That helped us in many ways. We had to lean on companies that we never did business with before. We had to lean on companies that did business with us, but never in the PPE space, that had to provide us back these values. We had to lean on companies that were newly formed, but actually had strong relationship internationally to try and figure out how we can overcome those things. But we had to take risks along the way because some of these companies were not able to fulfill or to provide us the solutions that we needed. So we had to make sure that not only are our clinical products checked off, but also the way with business strategies we had to do it. We spent over $120 million within that first year just on the PPE items to support our total needs. The volume on some of the items that we purchased was very dramatic. And to this point here today, on the 3-level procedure mask that you typically see wearing, that's in blue, we are using over 500,000 of those a week as we speak. Those are some of the things that we needed to create. But then we actually had to put a strategy together how we actually can manage and sustain that model. We had to create a pandemic warehouse to do so. And that pandemic warehouse had to actually be managed and fulfilled on a routine basis. So we created reports to see exactly what we called a needs assessment to drive it and to try and figure it all out. But again, we had to lean on our customers. We had to lean internally in terms of what our specific needs are. We had to put some predictive analytics together to try and figure it all out. But at the same time, we had to make sure it's manageable and things were just being routinely done obviously in a business and a clinical way that was effective for us and for our solution for our staff and for our patients. Next slide, Allison, please. So this is one of the things I talked about before. This is our needs assessment. So every single day of the week, we reported up to the executives like Peter and others that actually provided them a list of the things that we're working on, and to make sure that we always had enough product for anybody that needed it throughout our whole system. That could be from our smallest locations that only had a few people in the office, to our leading Mass General and the Brigham locations that were using hundreds of thousands of these things every single day. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the products that we had, they were tracking. To the middle of it, we were putting some kind of modeling together and trying to figure out, here's our current usage and here's what our projected usage is if it actually moved up to another notch in regards to the usage, what we can do differently. We had drop downs to figure out, okay, what do we have on hand? What do we have in different locations? What we have in our pandemic space versus in our just regular distribution centers. And in each one of these left-hand side categories actually had manufacturers set aside 2 or 3 manufacturers for each that we had to pre-establish. And when we pre-established those, we had to make sure that those were clinically acceptable and they were good in a good financial position where they can keep that supply chain continue moving and moving and moving, and that we'd never have default on when we cannot receive product or not in the future. Next slide, please, Nelson. So one of the good examples of this, before we moved on, is that GCB was able to provide us. They're a women-owned company. We purchased these isolation gowns that were high in need. Back in April of last year, our volume that we're using is 82,000 of these a day that we were using as a system. So we had to keep a fair amount. We had to order a fair amount. We had to always prepare to make sure that we never ran out. And these are high-quality protective garment for our staff to make sure they're taking care of the patients. So we purchased 3.8 million of these over the course of the period of the 12 months. And we have enough in our inventory today to make sure that we prepared for that second surge and beyond. So these are the success stories that we had by leaning on our manufacturers, which were both minority business enterprise as well as women-owned companies. And it was very successful us. And if it wasn't for them, we'd be in a different situation today. But so I thank all of them today that has helped us support our needs. Thank you, and I'll move on to the next subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I get started, I would like to take a minute to first thank Peter for being an executive that supported this program over the years. I will also thank all the Mass General Brigham attendees, including members of the Supplier Diversity Advisory Group, Mass General Brigham's leadership in attendance, including Danny Monroe, and also our contract managers within supply chain, Lisa Scannell, head of the supply chain department. Thank you all for your support over the years and for attending here today. I will now go or start with our supplier diversity mission statement, which reads, to grow and sustain a program that identifies, develops, and values strong partnership with diverse suppliers. As an organization, we are committed to increasing spend and the number of suppliers engaged throughout the system. Next slide, please. This will be done using our strategic vision, which have been successful over the years. Now, the Supplier Diversity Program has established 3 pillars of success, which is embodied in our mission statement. It's the core day-to-day work and the strategic vision that drives us to success. All work must abide by one or more of these pillars. It has been successful for the organization, for the department, and we continue to work with a system that is measurable and accountable. And one example of that is using our RFP process. RFP means request for proposal. Once there is a request that comes through supply chain, that then triggers, because of contract language within the RFP, folks will reach out to Todd or myself to find, is there a diverse supplier that could participate in this bid? Usually the answer is yes. We then reach out to the supplier and inform them of an opportunity to participate in the bid. Then that process, once the supplier agrees and decide to contribute, to participate, we then move on to first advising the supplier what is needed and recruiting them so that they could compete successfully in the RFP. Next slide, please. Now, all this work is done through core values which has been created over the years, starting with increased awareness. By increasing awareness of the Supplier Diversity Program across Mass General Brigham affiliates, we increase the support and hold accountable department heads so that there will be greater engagement with minority-owned businesses and diverse suppliers across the system. Development of a robust program. This cannot be done by one person or one department. It is continuous. It is all of us coming together across the organization, working with suppliers to be successful. Then there is education. Education, which is done through our external affiliates, such as Pacesetters, in supporting programs like this and providing opportunities, increasing the awareness and building relationship with minority-owned businesses. Our end goal is to increase engagement within the Mass General Brigham communities we serve. Success for us is defined by a partnership with diverse suppliers which have increased revenue and hiring of employees and looks to serve the underserved communities that Mass General Brigham serves. Thank you. And I will now pass on to Todd Turner, Director of Supply Chain Sourcing.
Thank you, Ingrid. And Allison, can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is a little bit about the history of the Supplier Diversity Program at Mass General Brigham. And so starting in 2007, the program began with Ingrid in her direction. And the purpose of the program at that time was really to meet the NIH grant requirements for diverse supplier spend. We had a small portfolio of diverse suppliers that we worked with, and most of everything we did was done manually. And as you've heard Peter mention, that's no longer the sole need for why we do have the diverse supplier program, but it is still a need. 2012 was the first time that we performed a data scrub to really see what our diverse supplier spend was and how many diverse suppliers we had. That was an eye-opening experience because we thought that the count of diverse suppliers we had was actually a lot smaller, and we were able to use a third party to help us realize how much diverse supplier spend we actually had. At that time, we also worked on an internal video to really communicate about the program and build some awareness and some enthusiasm, and was a great way to do that. And then, as a result of that, the program was recognized and as one of the top supplier diversity programs in the country. 2016 was when things really started to change for us. And when we really refocused what supplier diversity meant. And I think, up until 2016, the program was just focused on having higher supplier diversity spend. But at that time, leadership in the organization and the organizational goals changed slightly. And leadership in the organization didn't change, the organizational goals did. I just want to be clear about that. But what we were really focusing on at that time then changed to be what are now the anchor program through the Healthcare Anchor Network and the Pacesetters program that we're talking about today. And so that really kind of shifted our focus and gave us the direction that we needed to move forward. Then a couple of years later, in about 2018, we received some additional funding for the program to do some additional data enrichment so that we could actually track how we were doing at supplier diversity as an organization. And so now we've got this program that we use that helps us track almost real time what our supplier diversity spend, the amount of diverse suppliers that we have, and really lets us get a lot more granular with that information and see really where we're having that spend. And so it just gives us a lot more information, good quality information about the program. And then more recently, I would say in probably 2019, I think we really started to push on getting language into our RFPs that aligned with what the organizational goals are, and really help us in the decision around picking vendors that had similar goals as us in terms of supplier diversity. And then we're also working on implementing contract language that would require all suppliers to participate in the program and help with our reporting requirements. So next slide, please. So how we look at our diverse supplier and the sort of the who, what, and where. And this is just a simple graphic to kind of outline it for us. So supplier diversity, as it started out in 2007 and kind of all the way up until about 2016, was really just looking at all diverse suppliers and geographically really any diverse supplier in the country. And then with the shift in focus in 2016 with Pacesetters and Anchor, we started to look a little bit more regionally and actually a little bit more local. So Pacesetters, again, are minority business enterprises, and generally speaking in the Metro Boston 128 Beltway, although there's some, as we know, that are outside, but generally speaking. And then Anchor for us is a much more focused program and focused on local underserved communities in Boston. So it does include all suppliers, but with the suppliers that can have an economic impact on the local communities in Boston. So consistent with what everybody's talking about today. Next slide, please. So this really, again, just solidifies our focus, and how we think of things. Again, we've got Pacesetters, Anchor, and supplier diversity, and they've all got their sort of geographical areas that they're focused on. And really what it boils down to is that our supplier diversity program is focused on local MBEs, and again, we're tracking all spend and looking for opportunities with all diverse suppliers, but the point of the program and the focus really is around local MBEs. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through every bullet on this slide, but just looking at our program and what we hope to accomplish over the next couple of years, we've outlined 3 phases of development, sort of a current 1 to 3 year and 3 to 5 year plan, and the consistent buckets. So as you look down, where is the focus? What are we going to be working on in terms of, the geography and with the categories of suppliers? How are we going to manage our data, and what are we going to be looking at it with our data in terms of baseline and benchmarking? How are we going to handle our internal and external outreach? And what are we going to do with the program over the next several years to develop that? And then finally, what are the day-to-day needs, and how are we going to meet those daily needs? Next slide, please. So moving forward, I think we just want to make sure we continue to understand the history of the program, really understand what's worked and what hasn't worked, and make sure we continue to do more of what's worked. Currently, we're focused on meeting the internal and external needs, and the contract managers speaking after me are going to talk a little bit about what the current needs are and some of the successes of the program. Really to keep focused and minimize distractions to the program. And really, again, it's that keeping focused on the local MBEs. And then really just continue to be consistent with our messaging, be practical about our expectations, and be humble. So listen to what's being said, not only internally to our business owners, but also listen to what's happening in the market, listen to what's happening with our suppliers, and really try to manage the program around what we're hearing. So planning for the future, again, we just have to perfect the basics with our supplier diversity program, and that's having consistent messaging and marketing, that's having good quality data so that we can manage the program and understand how we're performing, and having good metrics to be able to measure how we're doing. We need to invest in the demand side, so that is, for us, that's messaging internally, messaging on how we need to put more focus into our diverse suppliers, and being intentional about our spend with those diverse suppliers. And then on the supply side, it's making an investment in our suppliers, making sure we have a solid portfolio of suppliers that can meet the demands of the organization. Aligning goals, again, we've got to make sure that the supplier diversity program aligns with the organizational goals. And lastly, we really have to create accountability, both internally and externally, but mostly internally, to make sure that folks that have the dollars to spend are really looking at diverse suppliers, local MBEs, and really trying to incentivize and create accountability for the program overall. And so we're going to turn it over to the contract managers who are going to talk a little bit more about some engagements that we've had with diverse suppliers, and then finally finish it with talking a little bit about what the risks are that we deal with on the contracting side and how to help navigate some of those risks. So I'm going to turn it over first to Jen Murga, who's a senior contract manager for research at Mass General Brigham.
Thanks, Todd. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity. Just to give you a little background about what we do in research contracting is really to manage the purchase services and the resources of items that are purchased by the research community. Some examples of those, the contracts that we manage are research samples that are sent to maybe another university or a organization that tests these samples for the researchers' studies. It can be collaborations or just direct purchase agreements. We also manage the maintenance agreements for the lab. So the microscopes or the large pieces of equipment that they purchase to do their testing. We do consulting agreements. And in over the last couple of years, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Did you lose me throughout the whole?
We did, yeah.
I was talking, I know it was okay. So I'll start from the beginning.
Allison, can you forward to the next slide, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Next one. There you go. All right, so not sure where we left off. I'll start from the beginning. So what we manage in the research contracting is the purchase services. So anything that the researcher is buying for their labs, that is, those are the contracts that we tend to handle. Some examples: research samples, where they perform analysis. Sometimes the studies are in collaboration with other universities or organizations. We manage maintenance agreements of the lab equipment. We do consulting negotiations as well for research, how they can better maybe their program or the research that they're working on. And recently, in the past couple of years, we worked on a freezer program for the research community where they can offload the old inventory of freezers and replace them with new energy efficient freezers to meet our sustainability goal. And that was halted, unfortunately, during COVID, but we're looking into new programs in the future, talking about those now. So that's an area of opportunity that we have coming forward. One of the large areas of management under research is consumable goods. So all the items, the beakers, even down to a pen or gloves or whatever it is that the researchers need in their labs, we manage those. And on the right-hand side, you can see the list of vendors that we have relationships with. And so how do they support us? They support us by, for example, Peter and Mark and Todd and Ingrid, they all mentioned WestNet. WestNet is one of our diverse suppliers where, we had to pivot pretty quickly during COVID to not only manage the research community, which sort of halted during that period of time, to helping to support the backstock of needs of supplies for COVID. And WestNet was an integral part of that, and not only just by providing the distribution mechanism, but also providing warehousing at the time. So going forward, what we're looking at for new opportunities is to grow our distribution of supplies and support our growth as an organization, and also help us manage as we pivot as an organization during either a pandemic or changes in the environment. That's all.
Thank you, Jen. And so if we can move to the next slide, please, and then Joanne Miller will take that.
Thanks, Todd.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name's Joanne Miller, and really humbled to be here
I'm glad to be part of this presentation. So being part of supply chain, it is like links in a chain where you go from one step to the other. And so my piece here is to talk about a success story of a really unique opportunity that came up with this supplier. They are DPV Transportation, that were hit pretty hard with the COVID, with not being able to use their services for transporting our staff for events or conferences. So there was a lot of out of the box thinking on this, where the supplier had these vans and ready for use, and could there be a way for us to use them? And that's where the community health at Mass General Brigham came in and came together with this idea of using the vans to transport staff to places in the community to do COVID testing and other needed services, to bring, what they needed to them. And they were so accommodating throughout the process, being very flexible, willing to wrap their vans in whatever logo we wanted to put on there, which you can see in the picture here. And also they revamped inside their vans, and you can see in the second picture where they put desks and computer units in there so that the staff could work on site, and also provided the tents that were set up outside to do the testing and other services that we brought to the community. And this was a real group effort, external and internal, to get this provided. And my role was to put a statement of work together, as we do in supply chain, day in and day out. We get requests for services, goods and services in my area, mostly services, and working with the department and the supplier. They were very responsive. Everything went very smoothly. We were able to get terms and conditions in place, look at all the risk, and make sure that the statement of work we had covered all those risks. And yeah, I was happy to be a part of it, and happy to see how well this worked out, because not only one van, we have up to a fleet of vans, I think 3 to 5. The first one started with the one at the Craft Center, and now I know BWH has one, and there's at least 2 others that are either in progress or out there doing this right now in communities deployed to Lynn, Chelsea, Everett, Revere, Charlestown. And so I think that is my piece. And next up, I think Marvin is going to talk about some of those risks that we look at with all of our requests that come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks, Joanne. I'll start this all fun section about risk factors and regulatory requirements with a fun fact. A recent study found that the healthcare industry spent about $23.7 billion annually to perform vendor risk management. This isn't really a surprising number when the same study found about 54% of the healthcare vendor participants had at least one data breach involving PHI over the past 2 years. In the modern world, third-party vendors provide Mass General with not only integral services and delivery of patient care, but unfortunately provide a valuable and consistent target for criminality. Both Mass General Brigham and the U.S. government have put supply chain stability and security at the forefront in this modern COVID and big data world. This focus has really created the modern regulatory environment that many might seem a bit daunting, but hopefully running through this list of critical risk factors and will make it at least our top level factors at least a bit more digestible. First, supply chain resiliency. As COVID-19, as we've talked about in this very presentation, the pandemic has made it clear that our supply chains are extremely susceptible to economic shocks, and that can cause these industry-wide shortages of essential resources. At MGV, we require our vendors to agree to use best efforts to give priority to MGB orders of essential products and services during these emergency conditions. But always, if necessary, MGB works closely with our vendors to develop resiliency plans, but I can't stress enough how this work really begins with our vendors, who must now set and measure their own resiliency targets in this new post-COVID world. On to background checks, that MGB requires that vendors and their employees will be on site for more than 2 weeks or will have access to PHI. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, pass certain background checks. And note that maintaining these background checks are the responsibility of the vendors. Additionally, most of our locations require vendors who enter either procedural or clinical care areas to register with Green Securities for credentialing and badging. A little bit more the details about that process is located in the actual presentation. We've included some links here that I hope will be helpful. Another important area in risk management is that MGB doesn't work with debarred businesses, and beyond screening for proper credentials, and then MGB screens businesses that are against government LEIE, NGA, and GSA list of companies who are barred from working with Medicare, Medicaid, or the federal government. Insurance control standards. It's important to remember that vendors that are working in the hospital or healthcare settings for longer than 2 weeks also must meet MGB's specific infection control standards. And as we can all understand, that during COVID, this is very important. So I will make sure to leave that link there as well. Insurance obligations are always important for all of our vendors to have and maintain proper insurance as it pertains to whatever SOW that you have with us, as Joanne talks about. That is our lifeblood, the SOW. Now on to Hipaa rules, which is, as we all know, is very important. That the Hipaa privacy rules basically sets forth policies to protect all individually identifiable health information that is either held or transmitted. So not only this is applied to our big box internet software service companies, but this also applies to our photographers, our videographers, who are very important in doing what we do and sometimes telling the important stories of what goes on in the hospital within reason. But a frequent note, we see that sometimes that can be overlooked because of the kind of size of the program, but it doesn't matter. Every bit of health information is important to us. So it doesn't matter if you're a large company or a small one. There are 18 different Hipaa identifiers that are kind of considered personable identifier information that can be used to identify, contact, or locate a single person. When that identifiable information is used along with health conditions or health information, it becomes our favorite word, protected health information, or PHI. Our vendors that have access to PHI or our back end, they sign what's known as our business associates agreement, and you're known as a business associate. Some popular terms that are in that BAA agreement that I think is important for us to just slightly run through is that there's no indemnification or limitation of liability for Hipaa. We consider ourselves as stewards of our patients and employees, and in some instances, information. And we look to our vendors to be a partner with us to share that responsibility. So in addition to PHI, we've got our Massachusetts privacy laws, which really, Massachusetts, we require all of our technology partners to have a security program and to monitor not just PHI, but all personal information that's important to us. The takeaway here is to become a Mass General Brigham vendor. You must be prepared to be a true partner with us in sharing in some of these heightened legal responsibilities that MGB takes on in providing healthcare in the state. Insurance, credentialing, and most importantly, the protection of personal confidential information. Because not only are you at risk of losing us as a potential client, Mass General Brigham is at risk of losing innovative vendors like yourselves that we rely on to serve our patients. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Next slide, please. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation, and thank you to the whole team. We do have a few questions that have rolled in from the audience. So Ingrid and Todd, I'll direct them at you, but please, other members of the Mass General Brigham team, please feel free to tune in as well. So one of the questions that we received was around your request for proposal process. Todd, I believe this was mentioned in one of your slides. Can you share with our audience how you have altered your bidding process and maybe your RFP language over the years so that you can include more minority-owned company representation?
Yeah, part of what we ask for in the request for proposal process is two things. First and foremost, we ask if the suppliers that are responding are diverse suppliers. So that's the first question. And what we're trying to get at there is really, are you what we consider to be tier 1 diverse supplier? So we have direct spend with that organization. If not, then the second piece that we're asking is what your diverse supplier spend is. And we also ask by location. So more specifically for us, we ask how much spend you have in what we consider to be our anchor neighborhoods. And those are the local Boston neighborhoods. So it really does align with what our focus is. It's local diverse suppliers. And like I said, it's tier 1, which is the priority for us, but where it's not tier 1 spend, it's tier 2. And that, again, just helps us in the decision support process to make sure we're selecting and engaging with suppliers that have similar goals and values.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Todd. I have another question here coming from the audience. How do you tackle price points when some minority-owned companies might not be able to compete with larger vendors? What are some of the specific guidelines that each of you might be looking for in a new vendor in order to make them more competitive?
Ingrid, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I can. Thanks. Well, supply chain at Mass General Brigham, it's a number of things that goes into which supplier we engage. One is quality, another is pricing, as asked here. When all are equal, we are getting the same quality of product at the similar price. Of course, more than likely, it will go to a diverse supplier, particularly if it's local. If quality it's always an issue, but when pricing in some cases may be a bit higher for several reasons. As an organization, we have examples where we have worked with diverse suppliers so that they can provide lower pricing, and that may very well involve using the organization's pricing with the manufacturer. That was done with the situation going back to Westnet. As a smaller business, it was difficult for them to compete. Mass General Brigham back then was partners healthcare negotiated with the manufacturer so that Westnet can get similar pricing as our larger suppliers, so they can then compete on an equal basis for the business. Other situations, it's not always the same. It's not a straight cut across the board. But when it's possible, if it's a small point difference in the prices, we will then consider working with that supplier as well.
And this feels like a good follow-up question. So how do you maybe work with other minority-owned companies together if they're within your network, and perhaps they can complement each other with a contract, and perhaps that helps with capacity? Are you seeing anything to that end?
There have been conversations where we ask suppliers to partner with another supplier to meet the need of the organization so that they can absorb increase their capacity for a larger organization. It depends on the supplier, but let's say, for example, MBE to MBE, that relationship, it's encouraged and we will work with the supplier, but that's not always successful. It's a case-by-case basis as well.
Thank you, Ingrid.
You're welcome.
Did anyone else want to add? Okay, the next question that came from our audience.
Can I add one
Oh, yeah.
thing?
Please do.
I think the answers have all been on the mark, but we need to be open to creativity, okay? And if people can come to us with good ideas, as Ingrid said, we're going to look at them. And price does matter. I'm not going to say price doesn't matter, but if it's something that it helps us achieve our overall goal and the pricing is close enough, we at the top may say we'll absorb that additional cost, okay? But it's got to be some creative thinking, and execution trumps everything. You know, when you're dealing with suppliers and vendors, people need to be able to execute, deliver on service level and quality levels. If we can get those, we'll be flexible, but we need to get those criteria.
Thank you so much, Peter. Marvin, I think this question is coming to you. You had shared in your presentation that a lot of the background checks that vendors, this was their responsibility to make sure that they were keeping up to date. Can you share a little bit more about that process, especially if someone listening in might be new to the field or might be new to procurement and really wants to understand how to find information on these certifications or special procedures?
No, definitely. That's a great question. You know, we want to make this as clear and as easy as possible. The best place to start is with the link we've included in the PDF. I think we've really, because every situation is slightly different depending on what your role is going to be in the hospitals. We want it to be very clear and very precise in terms of what the steps are. So that's honestly my best advice, is start there at the Mass General link that we've included, and I think that really breaks it down well.
Great, thank you so much. Ingrid and Todd, I think that this question might come to you. Can you give us a sense of, once a vendor reaches out for an opportunity or maybe perhaps bids on a project, can you give us a sense of the timeline of from like start to finish for a new contract to be executed?
I think, Ingrid, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Thank you. That varies. It depends on what the supplier is offering, what the need of the organization, the department. During COVID, I'll give you an example. At the beginning of the pandemic, as we know it, there were several suppliers reaching out with PPE supplies, trying to connect with supply chain. Many of those calls came to me. At times, they did not have the best product. Should say it, gloves, yeah, it may serve the same purpose, but for healthcare, it may not meet the need of our clinicians and our patients. Over the time, I've noticed where there are examples of an increase in prices that were more, at times it was more than 100 times what we were paying. So to say that it is a clear-cut, short, 6 months, 8 months, 18 months, I cannot say. It all depends on what product or services are being offered to the organization at the time and the organization's need. That can change. I will also mention here, we have considered during the pandemic a traditional versus a non-traditional method of doing business. The DPV example is an example of a non-traditional engagement for supply chain. And Joanne mentioned it during her presentation. I have spoke to about this on other platforms as well, where this DPV, and I know they're at this meeting. I've known them for a number of years as a transportation company, but internally we also have a transportation department. Was it a good fit? Yes, but they were providing a service that we had built in internally. Then comes COVID. We have a situation, they have a situation. These buses were sitting parked, yet they had to meet their payments. We had a need as an organization to go out into the community. Once they presented to our supplier advisory group, there was an answer to an existing issue. They meet the need of the organization. Joanne, everyone in supply chain will pull together to execute that and to make it happen quickly. That's non-traditional. It's not the traditional way of doing things at Mass General Brigham.
Yeah, I can support everything Ingrid just said. There are times that things are expedited, and we're able to do that. We're able to accommodate to expedite something, but also take into account it's a case-by-case issue where we have to consider all of the risks. And if something does demand more time for something to be looked at or more time to negotiate terms, then that is unfortunately what needs to happen. There'll be more time added. But in this case, we had pretty much all the ducks in the row. By the time it got to me, there were a few points I chimed in on, and we were able to get that worked out with the supplier and get it turned around quickly.
Well, thank you so much. That's honestly all the time that we have, but thank you to the full team at Mass General Brigham for today's presentation. I'm so thankful to have your team on board with Pacesetters. And Ingrid, thank you for pulling this off and working with me throughout the scenes.
Thank you. I would like to add here, if there are any questions that have not been proposed or gone unanswered, please follow up with Todd and I. My email address is in the last slide. I will be happy to reach out to suppliers and to answer the questions.
Thank you so much. And of course, we do have another event coming up as part of our Doing Business series. Our next event will be on March 29th, and this will feature the procurement leadership team at National Grid. They will be joining us for a 2-part series with their team, so you don't want to miss it. You can register for these programs and more by visiting bostonchamber.com. Once again, thank you for joining us. Please stay safe and healthy. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank you.
everyone for attending.